everyone. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to trickle in before we get started. Hope everyone's having a great Thursday. Just as everyone starts to join, I'll give a little bit of orientation to our Q&A and just how we'll run the webinar for anyone who hasn't joined a Rockerbox webinar before. So you'll see on the right hand of your screen, there's a chat box. You're able to use that to submit questions. So we'll be stopping to answer any questions as we go. So please don't hesitate to add any questions. And we also have time at the end. So that's the best way to communicate with us. And unfortunately, we can't see your faces, but we'd love to have engagement in the chat. We're just waiting for quorum here. We already have a pretty good sized group. We'll get started in just about a minute. Well, it's 11:02. Well, at least in my time. I know for those of you on the East Coast, it's 2. I think let's go ahead and get started. And some of you just heard the spiel, but as we go, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, which you'll see on the right-hand side. We're really excited to talk today around top of funnel and how in today's, we're calling it performance-obsessed world, how you can make a case for brand investment. We thought this topic was really timely as we're in Q3 and brands start to plan for Q4 and holiday, and really thinking about building your top of funnel now so you can convert your users later on, and thinking about not just where you should be investing, but thinking about things like creative. And I have a great co-host with me here today to give context on all of the experience that he's had working across brands on building their top of funnel. So I'll introduce myself first and then hand it over to Mark. I'm Kelsey, the head of customer success at Rockerbox. And then with me today, I have Mark.
Hi, everybody. Marc Viale. I'm the founder of Lab 415, but I've been marketing for over 30 years in the Valley, Silicon Valley. And really, my watershed moment was the chief growth officer at The Real, where I helped lead them from a small startup all the way through IPO. And lately I've been, this is a subject that's really near and dear to my heart in terms of growth. And so happy to be here.
Great. Yeah, Mark, we really appreciate you joining us. And he's a wealth of knowledge. So excited to chat through our topic today. We're going to start with kind of this first question around newer brands, which relate to probably many people in the room as you're looking to build out your own identity. So for newer brands that want to build their own identity outside of marketplaces, so thinking about your Amazons or even your Wayfairs, how should they start to think about top of funnel investment? And Mark, I know you're here.
This is a hot topic for a lot of brands, and you guys may have noticed that Amazon just started to give up on Google's paid Google advertising, because they notice what many of us actually do is we go direct to Amazon, direct to Wayfair, direct to Chewy, Walmart. And so people are, and a lot of smaller brands are trying to make momentum on Google search or even AI. They're missing out on a lot of traffic and just getting market share. It's really hard. And, I'll give you an example. There was a small company that was selling Murphy beds, really nice Murphy beds. And what I loved about them is they had, really good videos on how to put them together. And they're really easy to put together, and, versus some of the other competing brands, right? And so I was talking to the founder, and he was like, I'm just going to, I really want to win in Google. And I'm like, but they're bypassing Google and they're going right to Wayfair, right to Amazon to find these things, and you're not going to be able to make a dent. And so his choice was to go and be on Amazon or Wayfair, and then you're just a commodity, and you're basically at the will of pricing. And so and that's a hard way to go. And so I always tell brands, it's all about building your base, and the best way to do that is top of funnel. And for some of the folks, top of funnel, what I define as TV, the old linear TV, CTV, podcasts, influencer marketing. That's all top of funnel, where your people are not searching for your product, which is a much smaller group. It's much bigger share of the market that you're going after to really explain your vision, your product, and your mission. And they may not convert right away, but over time they convert.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think this leads a bit into our next question around what channels brands should start to think about. And we focused here a bit on Gen Z, as we know that they're discovering brands differently than our other generations. And Marc, you mentioned linear, and we know that linear is in decline. And for the brands in the room, how should they think about testing into top of funnel? Where should they think about leading into first?
Yeah. So yeah, the Gen Z market is like the biggest generation that's been on this earth, right? And then Gen Alpha's following them. But back when I was at the Real, the big thing for us to win, and what really pushed us into an IPO, was that we did really well with the millennial market, right? And that was in the 2015 to 2019 timeframe, and that was really CTV, because linear was sort of aging out even then. And then Hulu came on board, and we were all excited about CTV. And that really helped us. Today, it's a little harder. Linear, of course, is declining every year, especially with the last political season, like CNN, just MSNBC are falling off. So how do you talk to Gen Z? And I think this is something that a lot of brands, especially luxury brands, are trying to figure out. And I would say there's still a lot of play that you can do on Meta and so forth, but YouTube and CTV are definitely big plays here. YouTube especially, and I've seen a lot of the brands. They're playing with influencers, like Louboutin was making a big hit with influencers and starting to get into the Gen Z mind. Pucci's doing a lot of influencer things, and they're the two brands that are winning in the retail and luxury brand space. And I would say also podcasts, and the big thing, evolution of podcasts, is the video format is starting to win. And so, and that's coming over to YouTube, and you're seeing lots of Gen Z that are watching these podcasts that are video format, and there's
on YouTube,
there's sponsorships.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of opportunity there. It's a little harder because you used to be able to just do the linear play and it would just get everybody. But there's definitely a play with podcasts and YouTube to win with this audience. And I would say it's critical if you're just still focused on the millennial, you're going to start to age out over time. And so you really have to capture this audience so they'll grow with you, and they're very loyal.
Yeah. How do you think about, and I think we're going to get into this a little bit later, but just considering time to convert on some of these channels, and for people in the room who know that maybe I invest in podcasts and I don't see results from it right away, how do you think about communicating that to internal stakeholders?
Yeah. And so a lot of this comes down to tracking as well. And so like you do need a great platform with MTA and surveys. Believe it or not, people are getting more friendly with QR codes. but you really need to be able to track this stuff in terms of, what signals am I seeing, And so one thing that we did with top of funnel that always comes up is branded search and direct. You definitely see this big boom in organic search, branded search. You do see there's some halos on your meta. And then you also see direct, right? And there's also, when you do top of funnel, it's not just digital that you're going to be impacting. You're going to be impacting your brick and mortar stores too. And so one thing we always talk about is how, for the digital clients, how are you, make sure you're collecting that email and SMS when they come to the site, because you're not going to convert a lot of these folks on the first session.
Right. So then how are you engaging with them later?
You have to create a nurturing stream that's going to really pop. And then, a lot of these digital brands that have migrated to brick and mortar, like the Everlanes, the Real Reels, and so Reformation and so forth, they already are accustomed to my account online. And so they're accustomed to that in the brick and mortar, and they're going to give email. And then if you get that email, there's platforms out there that you can match back, to your campaign. And so, but top of funnel, I would say that you need at least a survey. You need at least a survey. You need to be able to look at organic traffic. Surveys, believe it or not, people fill out. And, we've seen up to 50% tracking on surveys. And then, of course, there's MTA. And then as you get more advanced, where you're spending a lot more money and you can get a signal, you do media mix modeling, which is more correlation based. But you don't have to do that in the beginning. You can do a lot of this with surveys and looking at organic traffic.
Something a little lighter weight. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Also, I'll note for anyone in the room, if you have questions as we go, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. We are monitoring this, so we'll stop for questions as we go. To the survey piece, I'm actually curious, Marc, we have some clients who will say, well, actually, we don't really trust survey that much because we know that people will just fill out the first thing they see, or maybe they have recency bias where they say, I heard about you from Facebook, but they actually listened to that podcast. How do you think about that and taking survey with a grain of salt, but then also getting value from that?
Yeah, and usually surveys, you're usually triangulating. You're usually using several data points, and surveys another data point. And definitely, the survey bias of, filling out the first one, you definitely have to work with a partner that's going to be able to dynamically expose the answers so that it's not the first answer every time. But you're also going to be looking at tracking in terms, some people will have an MTA. Like if you're working with Rockerbox, you're going to have an MTA. You'll be able to get that answer. You'll have the organic traffic that you can look at. And you can also look at it from geo and see if there's a geo bump. And then you have the survey. And so you sort of triangulate these three levers just to see where it's working. And I think a lot of the best campaigns, top of funnel campaigns, lose not because the creative was bad or the media was bad. It was because of tracking. And
just no way to justify it.
Yeah, a lot of times if you just do a read in the first 15 days, you may not see these signals. And when I'm working with folks, I try to get them to do this over 60 days, over 90 days, so that we actually look at the signals and try to find something. I say by the second month of a campaign, you're starting to feel it. And then by the third month, it's very convincing.
I think that's a great call out. As many of our clients will say, after 2 weeks, we're not seeing results yet. Should we keep this on? Should we turn it off? And our answer is oftentimes you have to give it more time, even if it is painful in the beginning, to understand what your result is.
Yeah, and all of our digital, brands are so used to instantaneous Google click through and
Right.
like seeing results right away. And it's hard to get them away from that. But the thing is, when you're talking about market share and you talk about the tiny amount of people searching for your product offering versus the huge offering you get, from doing top of funnel, you're exposing your product to such a much larger audience that it just opens yourself up to growth right away. And I've seen brands do this, with like all of a sudden there was a shower head filtering brand that you guys have probably seen on TV, Jolie Skincare or something like that.
I have a couple in my apartment.
I mean, they did a really good job with like TV and influencers, and people are like, "Oh my God, I need my skin to look that good." You would not have been
Exactly.
searching for that,
This is
and
so
so
true.
you would not have been searching for that, and so expose such a larger audience, and they did it with with CTV.
There's a big piece of category awareness there, I think, for some brands of you don't know what
Huge.
you need till you understand that you need it.
Exactly. And, like I work with some companies that do online laundry services, and like
Mhm.
maybe you didn't know this kind of solution worked out,
Yep.
existed out there. And so like once you get exposed to it, it's like, oh, this is great.
Yep.
It's like found money.
Exactly. Um,
Yeah.
I think this actually lends well into our next topic around brands with more limited budget. So it sounds great to say we're going to invest in top of funnel and build our brand, but for some brands in the room might be looking at the rest of the year and saying, well, we actually have a really limited budget for top of funnel just based on what finance is approved or where we're looking at in terms of performance halfway through the year. What would be your recommendation there? And this kind of flows into our conversation around creative as well.
Yeah. So this is a really hard topic for brands in the beginning because they're used to the big, Fortune 100 spending, and they think that's what TV is. They think that's what top of funnel is, podcasts and so forth. And it's really, it's changed a lot. And I would say there's companies out there like Mountain, TV Scientific on the CTV front. There's lots of podcast companies can get you going pretty quickly. And, I always suggest, you're going to want to spend in the media area, you're going to be maybe you're starting out like 50,000 a week. Okay. And that may sound like a lot, but you can always scale back,
Yeah.
but again, you have to give it a chance. You have to give it a chance. So I always say you got to push on that 4 to 8 week push. But you want to, I would say in that $25,000 to $50,000 in media a week to give these brands, and don't go crazy with all kinds of different testing because the media spend will get spread out and fragmented and you won't see a signal.
You really need to be
And
focused.
yes, and
Yeah.
and then branch out as you see signals.
Yep.
The one thing I always like to do with companies is, test your messaging in less expensive platforms like Meta before you go out with your big messaging. And creative. And creative's changed a lot too. When I started doing commercials at the Real, we were spending, upwards to 250,000 on a spot, and we were doing the spots three times a year, right? And so that seems like a lot to a lot of companies, but a lot of creative companies they've heard the feedback that that's just a showstopper. And
Yep.
so there's some that you can find production creative houses out there that will do pretty good spots for under 50K, 60K. You get a good spot, and then you can work that spot for 6 months. And so a lot of companies get scared about that. You can also leverage that spot in different mediums too.
Right. It's not just for that CTV spot.
Yes. And so at the end, the creative's just a rounding error because a lot of companies just grow. And so I know companies that were growing on, Google and Meta will still be your bread and butter.
Yeah.
But they were growing 5-10%. And now they're growing 40% because they went full funnel with their top of funnel. And, so these become not big issues down there, but it is a hard conversation to be getting.
Yeah. I think kind of to continue to build on this on the creative front, knowing that barrier to entry has been lowered, which is fantastic, how should brands think about crafting their creative? What matters most in that balance between brand versus performance?
Yeah, and with TV, I always like to straddle the fence between brand and performance. I don't want to go too brand. A lot of spots out there sometimes become too lifestyle. It's not life cycle, lifestyle. It becomes too lifestyle focused, and you're like, what am I watching? It makes me cry, but I'm not. I don't know what brand it is.
Yeah.
I don't know what the next step is. And a lot of brands, a lot of like startups, they want to do something funny to break through. And guess what? You're not going to always be funny to a lot of people, and it could be off-putting.
Right.
It could be a negative reaction. And so I think there's one thing is, and I talk to a lot of brands, believe it or not, they don't know their key value propositions. And I like to call it your 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And so for example, the real, it was, luxury authentication, our luxury brands, and then up to 90% off. And so that 1, 2, 3 had to be crafted in a 30-second spot
where people remember it.
And then we also, we'd like a music hook that was sort of nice, that could sort of get you involved. But then we love to have the brand focused on every page, like in the lower right-hand corner, so people can see it. And also a voiceover, because if you're just showing text, people at the gym or people, at home will start to like zone out. And so you need a voiceover that's going to get their attention. And then at the end, you need that offer hook. And you also, a lot of folks now are doing QR codes. Believe it or not, people are watching YouTube, watching CTV on their living room TV, and they're doing a QR code, and that helps a lot on tracking. But I would say you really have to focus on the brand and the offer to make it work. Otherwise, if it's too lifestyle, if it's too funny, it's not gonna work. And I know, there's been lots of, the farmer's dog, for instance, they were doing lots of great performance / brand campaigns. And then during the Super Bowl, they went all brand, all lifestyle. So it was all about dogs and how we all love our dogs and so forth. And it made everybody cry. And but they didn't do another Super Bowl ad, so it's like,
did it actually drive people to site? Yeah.
So you want to do performance plus brand to make it work.
And I think for those in the room that are planning for Q4, which probably the majority of us are, how should these brands start to think about balancing, when should we drive top of funnel? If we are thinking about testing into CTV, is now the time to do it, compared to what targets they have during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or depending on, when their push is during the year?
Yeah, so I would say now is the best time because, as we get closer to holiday, you're going to get into much higher CPM competitive. It's going to be very competitive in terms to get out there. And I would rather you start learning now before learning in Q4, which is like Was it because of our CPM was too high, or was it
Right.
because our spot was horrible? You know, and so I would, love for you to, get your spot out there in 4 to 6 weeks, right? Starting today. And
Now's the
there's some
time.
services out there that you can actually you can recruit your audience and do a focus group to like 250 people and get a read on your spot before it goes into production.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good way to get a gauge without spending a lot of money on production and media before it even goes out. And there's services out there that do that.
That's a good idea.
And then you get out there, and I would say, we're just coming off the June and July slowdown in
Right.
retail. In August, it starts to pick up. I'm starting to see signs already. August is starting to pick up, so it feels really good for all of us in marketing. And then September's huge, right?
Right.
September's great. October's like, oh my God, I'm feeling this. And then I would say you're still going really good up until mid-November, and then the rates start to increase,
Yep.
right? And then also there's political season sometimes
Yep.
that you're combating with on top of funnel. Not this year. And then I typically slow down on the spend during those times because hopefully I've already built up enough
Right.
exposure.
And it's just
Now
time
I'm
to
doing
convert.
email and SMS and remarketing. And then it's funny, Christmas Day is one of the best. It's the cheapest moment on CPM because people stop spending, and all these media companies are trying to fill spots, and
Right. So it's like
everybody's
Boxing
home.
Day's over. Everyone's home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody's home together, and it's a great way to get the whole family with media. And
Mm.
that lasts, you can get really good competitive rates all the way up into January. And then, my big instruction to folks is build your base in the first half of the year, and you can convert them in the second half, and your
Yeah.
CAC will go way down. And yeah, but I would get started right away today.
Mm-hmm. I know another suggestion you had, Mark, was around testing messaging with paid social before you start to push into CTV, and that's something that I think makes a ton of sense and would be helpful for brands to think about.
Yeah, that was really powerful at the Real. We tested our value proposition in Meta. Which ones were clicking. Were people more interested in buying or selling?
Mm-hmm.
And we found out what messages were they were convincing.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, let's not waste time on that with a spot.
Yep.
Let's fix the spot now before we go out. And so that's we have a question.
Great. Thank you, Isabel. We have a question on what other channels outside of CTV and podcast would you recommend for brands with limited top of funnel budget? Is there still relevancy with traditional media like out of home, print, and radio? That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your audience. It's believe it or not, print still there's print's having a little bit of resurgence, and I see some retailers doing some print. I'm not a big fan of out of home, but I do see folks doing it. Radios, it can be interesting on certain markets. Sirius X, it depends on your audience, right? Sirius XM generally has, because you have to pay a subscription, it's a different audience than someone listening to free radio. And so those Sirius XM works. But I would say my favorite bread and butter ones are going to be CTV, podcasts, and with a video format are going to be the ones that really pull. And YouTube's, a growing piece of this podcast movement.
Yeah. Oh, follow up. If you're running top of funnel campaigns on paid social, what bidding objectives do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, top of funnel campaigns on paid social, tend to run a little hot in terms of CAC. And what I see the best thing to do is be doing remarketing on the paid social with your campaigns, because and also a lot of these marketing spots do different. They don't do as well on a social piece, and so unless it's an influencer piece, right? But it has to be more authentic on Meta, and more, okay, it's not a commercial. And so I like more authentic pieces on Meta. Tend to work better, and I would say definitely for remarketing rather than prospecting on Meta. But it's different. Like beauty's different. A lot of people do prospecting on Meta with beauty, and it works. Like
very
Elf.
audience and brand specific.
Yeah, Elf does a really good job. But again, Elf has established their brand. They have a cult following, and they're able to do really cool brand campaigns on Meta that just have they really pick up a viral nature.
I think we have one last question on our side, and then plenty of time for Q&A from the audience too. And it wouldn't be a webinar if we weren't talking about AI in some capacity. So wanted to talk about with the changing role of AI in discovery. So we know, there's word of ChatGPT linking users directly to site and cutting out affiliates, and how this is going to change and already is changing the way that people discover brands and discover where they want to purchase from. And any thoughts or final thoughts on what marketers should be doing to prepare for this?
Yeah, so this is a big change for all marketers, and especially SEO folks. Or I guess now they're becoming GEO folks, right? And so when we were at The Real, our bread and butter was SEO. We had such a big play with our brands, and we would talk about those brands and authenticating those brands, blah, blah, blah. And it was huge, right? Now for a starting out brand, it's going to be so hard with AI. For one, you have to have an authority to rank in an AI overview, a ChatGPT, Perplexity, and it's going to be harder and harder. And I know ChatGPT was playing with the idea of doing like a bounty or affiliate type relationship for your brand to show up in results. And so that's going to get harder and harder for small brands to win. And then, it's funny when you talk to SEO people, they sound more like brand marketers today, because they're like, you're not going to get as many clicks today. You're going to get your brand mentioned. And that's a hard piece to sell to your CFO, because, it sounds like, you're claiming wins on view through, and people want to see clicks. And so this is going to become harder and harder. And a lot of people are using these GEO AI. I played around with them. They're still hard. And so if you have an authority, if your brand authority is weak, and when I mean brand authority, it's like, does the AI company think of you as an established, entrenched authority on a subject? That's really hard for a beginning company. And before you could win on SEO and get out there, but it's going to be harder and harder. And this is why, you're going to want to have a top of funnel play, because you want to get over the Google hoop. You want to get over the Amazon hoop.
It's more reason to diversify.
And I got to tell you that, and the only way to build a brand and build your base is going to be top of funnel. Otherwise, you're going to have to really pay to get into to play. And so it's going to get harder and harder for brands. Hopefully there's still some semblance of SEO out there in the future. I would say the one parting piece, in addition to top of funnel, I think you really need to think about your brand on a brick and mortar level. because one, top of funnel does feed brick and mortar, and but brick and mortar really helps you on local search.
Yep.
And so that's a big play. And Rockerbox is a great platform where you can actually see the brick and mortar impact with your attribution tools. They have solutions that will help you there. And that will give you authority. When you have stores in a market, that will give you trust with the consumer, but also with these AI engines where they're like, oh, they have a physical store presence. And so they have, so they will show up, and you're going to win on maps. People do a lot of shopping on maps. And so, that's a big play. And I think top of funnel, brick and mortar, all play well together.
That's great advice. Well, thank you, Marc, for all of your insight. This was awesome. For those in the audience, we do have time for Q&A. So if there's anything that wasn't already posted in the chat that you're curious about, anything you want to pick Marc's brain on, please send over some questions.
Okay.
Don't be shy. We have plenty of time to cover some questions if there are any. Or if, we will share a recording. So if you want to listen to this after, send this to members of your team. If any of you are interested in connecting with Marc, please do so.
The one other thing, Kelsey, I'd like to add is when you do have good attribution tools, which would, combination of MTA, survey, and media mix modeling, what you'll find is top of funnel actually does really well from a CAC perspective in relation to bottom of funnel like Google. And the other thing is what you'll see is what we've always discovered is that Google brings a lot of shoppers in who are doing price comparison, and they tend to shop. They tend to have a lower LTV than your top of funnel shoppers who feel like they found your brand and they become an enthusiast about your brand.
Absolutely.
And so I always found that LTV is higher. And so what you want to do once you get the CAC and all that and the attribution is you want to bring that back into your data warehouse.
Yes.
And track those customers over time versus your Google customers. And you'll find LTV is higher. And so you're getting a much faster payback over time on those top customers that you may have thought was an expensive play, but it really isn't.
Yep. I think that's a great call, and something we see a lot of our customers do with the Rockerbox data sets in their warehouse is look at LTV to CAC ratio and really cohort your users based on how they're entering the funnel and how that changes the amount of money that they spend with your brand over time. Because to your point, you might convert someone really cheaply on affiliate and see a really competitive CAC there. But then when you look at LTV over time, you realize that was a customer that wanted your first time discount and wasn't, someone that you continue to engage with over time, compared to maybe someone that comes in from a more expensive, CTV ad, but to your point, really resonates with the brand and ends up spending more over the course of their relationship.
And I got to tell you, scaling. So the big thing is like, how can you, one day you're going to get this call from your board or from your CEO saying, how can you scale this faster? And if you're saying all I have is Google or Meta, it's going to be a lot harder to scale. And so once you figure out top of funnel earlier in the game, that's a much bigger audience that you can scale up faster. And so when you're thinking about, okay, I need to get this bigger in the next 6 months, well, you really need to start thinking about top of funnel, because that's going to move the needle. And all the companies that take the big leap forward, DoorDash, all these companies that take the big leap forward, the Real, and so forth, had to go into top of funnel to make it work. Because otherwise, efficient CAC will only get you so far.
Yep. We have a question from Stephanie. So saying our media buying agency manages our YouTube buying. We've been struggling to prove value in YouTube. We know our audience is spending time there, so it might be a matter of finding the right metrics and investment. Can you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's not, and Kelsey and I would probably agree, that's not an uncommon refrain on YouTube. And I always know our customers out there on YouTube, right? And it really comes down to your attribution and like, how can we show that that's winning? And so with YouTube, I think the best things you can do is like, you have to forget about the direct attribution and you do a geo test and see if there's any correlation that like, hey, I'm looking at Chicago and DC, and DC, I'm not going to run YouTube ads, and just see what happens, right? And the other thing is surveys, which is another validation point. But also make sure your YouTube has QR codes, because I think that's a big overlook on, and people don't like them because they're ugly, but they do work. And not, I hear that over and over again, that guess what? QR codes was the deciding factor on showing a sign from this channel. But yeah, YouTube's a hard one, but the audience is definitely there.
I think Mark used the word earlier, triangulation, which is something we see to be really critical with our customers for these hard to track channels like YouTube. So thinking about incrementality testing mixed with your survey, mixed with starting to track the impact of YouTube on conversions, understanding time to convert can be a metric that's super valuable, especially in communicating internally. Well, we know that it takes X amount of time for someone on YouTube to actually convert. So if we're investing more there, we're not going to see results on revenue that quickly.
Yeah. And a lot of times I'm looking at the overall CAC and like, if I'm spending more and the CAC staying pretty static, that's a good sign,
For sure.
And again, knowing your break even and how much you can spend on CAC and still be safe is important.
Great. Well, if there's no other questions, this has been awesome. I want to thank Mark for his time. Thank you all for joining. We will send out the recording, so you'll get that to your inbox. And as always, if you have questions on Rockerbox, please reach out. Or if you want to speak to Mark, please also connect with him. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your Thursday and good week.
You want me to answer that one, Kelsey?
Yeah, that's what I was like. We have a question that just came in last minute from Annie. What's your thoughts on tapping into more expensive tentpole moments on CTV, like Super Bowl, versus scaling regular impressions?
I avoid them so much. I gave you the example of the Super Bowl spot. You can get you get that 1, 2, 3 day pop, but then it's gone. And you spent so much money on that. I could spend that money so much better throughout the year. And I avoid them like the plague. And there's a lot of agencies that will tell you need high CPM to make it work. And that's a lot of, I don't know how truthful that is. The one thing you got to be careful about is agencies like to spend higher CPM because that goes through your budget faster and then they get their percentage, right? So I think you really have to understand your consumer, understand what they're watching. And a lot of old buyers will say that you really have to still buy the program, versus the household. And so, a lot of CTV folks will be convincing you that we'll do a better job of finding your market, not by channel, but by household. And I think you got to do a mix of that. There's still like, hey, I still want to get my customer on NPR, versus cheaper, that same customer in cheaper mediums. But I do think that you should avoid these high CPM situations because they're really dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
They're big risks, risks.
For sure. And more pressure to justify.
Oh yeah. It's a make or break.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Annie, for the last minute question. And for those of you that stuck around, hope you all have a great day. Thank you for joining us.